The twin sons of Corvin Prime beat down mercilessly as Marcus Thorne wiped sweat from his brow, squinting through the heat shimmer at the skeletal remains of what had once been a luxury transport vessel. His boots crunched on crystallized sand, each step deliberate as he navigated through the graveyard of failed dreams and forgotten voyages. At 32, Marcus had seen enough of the galaxy's underbelly to know that every piece of wreckage told a story, usually one that ended badly. His portable scanner chirped insistently, indicating power signatures that shouldn't exist in a hulk this old. Marcus paused, one hand instinctively checking the plasma cutter strapped to his thigh. The tool doubled as a weapon when necessary, which in his line of work was more often than he'd like. Salvaging wasn't for the faint of heart, especially not this far out in the fringe territories where law was a suggestion rather than a rule. The transport's hull loomed before him, its once pristine white surface now scorched and pitted from atmospheric entry. Someone had cut through the cargo bay doors, the edges of the metal still bearing the telltale marks of an industrial torch. Recent work? Maybe a week old at most. Marcus's jaw tightened. Competition was bad for business, but salvagers had an unspoken code. You didn't jump another crew's claim. He ducked through the opening, letting his eyes adjust to the dimness. Shafts of sunlight pierced through hull breaches, creating columns of light filled with dancing dust particles. The interior had been thoroughly picked over, empty cargo containers scattered like children's blocks. Whoever had been here first had taken anything of obvious value. But Marcus hadn't survived 5 years as an independent salvager by only looking for obvious things. He moved deeper into the ship, his scanner leading him toward the power signature. It was faint, barely registering, but consistent. Emergency backup cells, maybe, or something more interesting. The corridor opened into what had once been passenger quarters, doors hanging open like missing teeth. He swept each room methodically, finding nothing but scattered personal effects and the lingering smell of abandonment. The scanner pulled him toward the last cabin at the end of the hall. The door here was closed, unusual given the thoroughness of the previous salvagers. Marcus approached carefully, pressing his ear against the metal. Silence. He tried the manual release. Surprised when it opened smoothly. The cabin was dark, except for a thin beam of light from a crack in the ceiling. In that narrow illumination, Marcus saw her, a girl, maybe 16 or 17, pressed into the corner with wide, terrified eyes. Her skin was an unusual shade of pale blue, almost luminescent in the dim light, and her hair fell in midnight black waves around a face that was undeniably alien, yet hauntingly beautiful. She wore what had once been expensive clothing, now torn and filthy, hanging loose on her thin frame. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse or dehydration, possibly both. "Please don't hurt me." Marcus slowly raised his hands, making himself as non-threatening as possible. His mind raced through possibilities. Velajan, if he remembered his xenobiology correctly. They were rare this far out, their homeworld being in a completely different sector. What was she doing here alone? "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, keeping his voice level and calm. "My name is Marcus." "What's yours?" The girl watched him with the wariness of a cornered animal. She didn't answer, but her eyes flicked toward an empty water container beside her, then quickly back to his face. "When did you last eat?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he knew the answer from her gaunt appearance. 3 days, she finally said. Maybe 4. Time is difficult to track. Marcus slowly reached into the pack at his side, moving deliberately so she could see every motion. He pulled out a ration bar and a sealed water pouch, setting them on the floor between them before backing away a step. The girl stared at the items as if they might disappear, then lunged forward with startling speed, snatching them up and retreating to her corner. She tore into the ration bar with desperate hunger, barely chewing before swallowing. Marcus watched her drain the water pouch in seconds, concern growing. She was in bad shape, worse than he'd initially thought. Dehydration, malnutrition, and who knew what else. Easy, he cautioned. Too much too fast will make you sick. The girl paused, looking at him with surprise, as if unused to anyone caring about her well-being. She forced herself to slow down, taking smaller bites. When the food was gone, she hugged her knees to her chest, still watching him with those impossibly large, violet-tinged eyes. "I'm Sienna," she said quietly. "Sienna," Marcus repeated, trying to piece together her story. "How did you end up here alone?" Her expression hardened, a flash of something bitter crossing her young face. "The crew that owned me decided I wasn't worth the food I consumed. They left me here 3 weeks ago, said if I was clever, I'd find a way to survive." Her lips twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I suppose I was clever enough to last this long." Owned. The word hit Marcus like a physical blow. Slavery was supposed to be extinct, wiped out by the Concordance Accords decades ago. But he'd been around long enough to know that laws meant little in the outer systems. Out here, power and credits made the rules. "You're Velasian," he said, more statement than question. Sienna nodded. "Half. My mother was Velasian. My father was human, though I never knew him." That explained her unusual features, the blend of two species creating something unique. Velasians were known for their empathic abilities and their rarity in human-dominated space. A half-breed would be even more unusual, potentially more valuable to the wrong people. Marcus made a decision that would change both their lives, though neither of them knew it yet. "I have a ship not far from here. The Wanderer. It's not much, but there's clean water, real food, and a medical kit. You're welcome to come with me." Sienna stared at him, suspicion warring with desperate hope in her expression. "Why would you help me?" "Everyone wants something. Maybe I'm just tired of seeing people treated like property," Marcus replied, surprised by the honesty in his own voice. "Look, I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm offering you a choice. Come with me, get cleaned up, eat a proper meal. If you decide you want to leave after that, I'll drop you at the nearest station with enough credits to start over. And if I refuse, then I leave you here with supplies and wish you luck." Marcus stood slowly, brushing dust from his pants. "But Sienna, this graveyard isn't kind to anyone who stays too long. The next salvager might not be as friendly." She considered his words, her thin fingers twisting in the fabric of her ruined dress. Finally, she stood, swaying slightly from weakness. Marcus moved to help her, but she held up a hand, stopping him. "I can walk," she said firmly, though her legs trembled. "Never said you couldn't," Marcus replied. "But if you fall, I'm catching you. Deal?" The corner of her mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. Deal. The walk back to the Wanderer took twice as long as Marcus's initial trek. He kept his pace slow, pausing frequently to let Sienna rest without making it obvious that's what he was doing. She maintained a careful distance, never letting him get too close, always keeping an eye on potential escape routes. Smart kid. When his ship finally came into view, he heard her sharp intake of breath. The Wanderer wasn't impressive by most standards. A modified cargo hauler with mismatched hull plates and evidence of countless repairs. But she was reliable, and more importantly, she was home. "She's seen better days," Marcus admitted, "but she flies true." He activated the cargo ramp with a touch to his wrist comb. As it lowered with a hydraulic hiss, Sienna hesitated at the bottom, looking up into the dimly lit interior. "Last chance to change your mind," Marcus offered. Sienna squared her shoulders, lifted her chin, and walked up the ramp without looking back. Marcus followed, keying the ramp closure behind them. The interior lights brightened automatically, revealing a surprisingly clean and organized cargo bay. "Wanderer, run a basic medical scan," Marcus called out. A warm, feminine voice emanated from hidden speakers. "Scanning. Subject shows signs of severe dehydration, malnutrition, and exhaustion. Recommend immediate hydration and rest." Sienna jumped at the voice, spinning to face Marcus. "Your ship talks? Basic AI system. Makes solo salvaging less lonely." Marcus gestured toward an internal door. "Come on. Let's get you taken care of." He led her through the ship, past his own sparse quarters and a compact galley, to a small cabin usually reserved for cargo he wanted to keep secure. It had a bunk, a small storage locker, and access to the shared bathroom. Nothing fancy, but clean and private. "This is yours for as long as you need it," Marcus said. "Bathrooms through there. Take a shower, as hot and long as you want. I'll leave some clean clothes outside the door. They'll be too big, but better than what you're wearing. When you're done, come to the galley. We'll talk over food." Sienna looked around the small space, her expression unreadable. "Why are you being kind to me?" Marcus paused in the doorway, considering his answer carefully. "Because someone should have been kind to you a long time ago. Because you're a kid who deserves better than being left to die in a wreck. Because maybe I'm tired of only looking out for myself." He met her eyes. "Pick whichever reason works for you." He left before she could respond, heading to his own quarters to find something that might fit her. His hands shook slightly as he sorted through his limited wardrobe, adrenaline finally catching up with him. What the hell was he doing? He was a salvager, a loner by choice and circumstance. He knew nothing about taking care of anyone, let alone a traumatized teenage alien. But as he heard the sound of running water start in the bathroom, Marcus knew there was no backing out now. For better or worse, Sienna was aboard the Wanderer, and that meant she was under his protection. The galaxy could throw whatever it wanted at them. He'd figure it out. He always did. 3 years had reshaped everything aboard the Wanderer, transforming both the ship and its inhabitants in ways Marcus never could have anticipated. The salvager who had once preferred solitude now found himself listening for the sound of footsteps in the corridor, the hum of someone singing in the galley, the quiet breathing of another person, sharing his small corner of the universe. Sienna was 19 now, no longer the terrified, half-starved girl he'd found in the wreckage. She'd grown into herself, her blue-tinted skin radiant with health, her midnight hair often tied back in a practical braid. She moved through the ship with confident grace, her hands as skilled with the plasma torch as they were with the navigation console. Marcus had taught her everything he knew about salvaging, mechanics, piloting, even some basic combat training when she'd insisted. She'd absorbed it all with fierce determination, as if building armor against ever being helpless again. But lately, something had shifted between them. A tension Marcus couldn't quite name and didn't want to examine too closely. He caught himself noticing things he shouldn't. The curve of her smile when she succeeded at a difficult repair. The way her eyes lit up when they discovered a promising salvage target. How her laugh seemed to make the recycled air feel fresher. He buried these observations deep, reminding himself of the frightened 16-year-old he'd rescued, even though the woman she'd become bore little resemblance to that broken girl. "Marcus, you seeing this?" Sienna's voice crackled through his helmet gum, pulling him from his thoughts. They were suited up, tethered to the exterior of a derelict military transport that hung dead in space. The ship had been adrift for at least a decade based on the corrosion patterns, abandoned after some conflict that had left it intact but powerless. Perfect salvage material. "What have you got?" Marcus asked, maneuvering around a twisted antenna array to reach her position. Sienna was examining a panel near the ship's dorsal airlock, her gloved hands moving carefully over the controls. Power cell cluster. Military grade, shielded design. If even half of these are still viable, We're looking at 6 months of operating costs covered. Marcus drifted closer, checking her readings. She was right, as usual. The cells were exactly the kind of score that made dangerous salvage operations worthwhile. Nice find. Think you can extract them without triggering any security protocols? She glanced at him, and even through the reflective visor, he could see her expression. Amused confidence with just a hint of challenge. Please. I had a good teacher. Something in her tone made his pulse quicken, and Marcus firmly told himself it was just the adrenaline of the salvage operation. All right, hotshot. Show me what you've got. He watched as Sienna worked, her movements precise and efficient. She'd taken to zero-gravity maneuvering like she was born for it, better than Marcus himself in many ways. Her smaller frame gave her advantages in tight spaces, and her half-Velasian heritage meant she processed spatial relationships with an almost supernatural intuition. First cluster disconnected, she announced, carefully placing the sealed container into her equipment satchel. Moving to the secondary array. Copy that. I'm heading aft to check the engine housing. Might be some intact thruster assemblies worth pulling. Be careful, Sienna said, her tone casual, but carrying an undertone of genuine concern that always surprised him. Marcus smiled despite himself. Always, Em? He made his way along the hull, using magnetic handholds to pull himself toward the engine section. The transport was massive, easily 3 times the size of the Wanderer, and in its prime had probably housed a crew of 50. Now it was just another ghost ship, its stories lost to the void. He was examining a promising thruster nozzle when his cum crackled with static. Then Sienna's voice cut through, sharp with urgency. Marcus, we have a problem. His blood went cold. In 3 years of salvaging together, he'd never heard that particular edge in her voice. Talk to me. Debris field incoming, vector 270 by 15. It's moving fast. Probably micrometeoroids kicked up by that pulsar we passed. We've got maybe 5 minutes before impact. Marcus checked his own sensors, cursing under his breath. She was right. A cloud of high-velocity particles was heading straight for their position, small enough to avoid ship sensors until they were dangerously close, but large enough to tear through a pressure suit like paper. Get to the airlock now, he ordered, already pushing off toward her position. We need to get inside. What about the power cells? We just need another minute. Forget them. Move, Sienna. He rounded the antenna array, spotting her still at the panel, working frantically to secure one more container. Stubborn, brilliant, infuriating woman. Marcus kicked off hard, crossing the distance between them faster than was probably safe. He grabbed her shoulder, physically pulling her away from the panel. Inside now, he shouted. Sienna didn't argue, recognizing the genuine fear in his voice. They moved together toward the airlock, their tethers reeling in automatically. Marcus could see the first glints of the debris field, catching starlight, beautiful and deadly. They weren't going to make it. Brace, he commanded, wrapping his arms around Sienna and turning his back toward the incoming storm. The first impact sounded like hail on a metal roof, then quickly escalated to a thunderous barrage. Marcus felt several strikes against his suit's backplate, the reinforced material holding, but the force still shocking. He tightened his grip on Sienna, using his body to shield her, praying his suit's integrity would hold. Then, as suddenly as it began, the storm passed. The silence that followed was deafening. Status, Marcus gasped, checking his suit's readouts. Minor breaches in the outer layer, but the inner seal was intact. He'd been lucky. I'm okay, Sienna replied, her voice shaky. Your suit took most of it. Marcus, your oxygen feed. He looked down, seeing what she'd spotted. One of the impacts had damaged his primary O2 line. Not catastrophic, but it would cut his air supply time significantly. It's fine. Let's get inside. They made it to the airlock and cycled through, helping each other out of their damaged suits once the atmosphere equalized. Sienna immediately grabbed the medical scanner, running it over Marcus despite his protests. "You're bleeding," she said, pointing to his shoulder where a piece of shrapnel had made it through the suit's layers, leaving a gash that was already seeping blood through his undersuit. "It's just a scratch. It needs treatment." Her tone brooked no argument. "Sit down." Marcus sat on a cargo crate while Sienna retrieved the medical kit, her hands steady as she cut away the damaged portion of his undersuit to expose the wound. Her touch was gentle but efficient as she cleaned and sealed the gash, and Marcus found himself acutely aware of her proximity, the warmth of her breath, the concentration in her violet-tinged eyes. "You shielded me," she said quietly, not looking up from her work. "You could have been killed, so could you. I'm not the one who matters here." Marcus caught her wrist, stopping her movements, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Don't say that. Don't ever say that." Sienna stared at him, something unreadable flickering across her features. They were close, closer than was probably appropriate, but neither of them moved away. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with words neither knew how to say. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you care so much?" "Because you've become the most important thing in my life," Marcus thought. "Because the idea of you getting hurt makes me want to tear apart the universe. Because somewhere along the way, you stopped being a responsibility and became—" What? What had she become? But he couldn't say any of that. Instead, he released her wrist and stood, putting distance between them. "Because you're crew. Because you're under my protection. Because that's how this works." Sienna flinched as if he'd struck her, and Marcus immediately regretted his harsh tone. But maybe it was better this way. Better to maintain the boundaries that were becoming increasingly blurred. "Right," she said flatly, packing up the medical kit with sharp, angry movements. "Crew. How could I forget?" She left without another word, and Marcus stood alone in the cargo bay, staring at nothing and wondering how he'd managed to hurt her, when he'd been trying to do the exact opposite. The journey back to Frontier Station 7 took 2 days, and they were the most uncomfortable days Marcus could remember. Sienna was professional, competent, but distant in a way she hadn't been since those first weeks aboard the Wanderer. She spoke to him only when necessary, took her meals in her cabin, and spent her free time in the engine room doing maintenance that didn't need doing. Marcus told himself it was better this way. The distance was necessary, healthy even, but the ship felt emptier than it ever had during his solo years. And he caught himself listening for her footsteps, missing the easy companionship they'd developed. On the second night, he found her in the observation deck, a small bubble of reinforced glass where they could watch the stars stream past during transit. She was curled in the single chair, staring out at the endless void, and for a moment she looked heartbreakingly young, vulnerable in a way she rarely allowed herself to be. Marcus almost turned away, respecting her obvious desire for solitude, but something made him stay. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her profile in the starlight. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for what I said in the cargo bay. You deserve better than that." Sienna didn't look at him. "You were honest. That's more than most people give me." "I was scared," Marcus corrected, surprised by his own admission. "When I saw that debris field coming, when I realized you might be hurt, it terrified me. And I don't handle fear well." She finally turned to face him, her expression guarded. "You've faced down pirates, navigated asteroid fields, walked through active fire zones during salvage operations. But you're afraid of me?" "Not of you," Marcus said, moving into the room slowly, as if approaching something wild and precious. "Of what I feel when I'm around you. Of how much you've come to matter to me. Of—" He stopped, not sure how to finish that thought. Sienna unfolded from the chair, standing to face him fully. The starlight painted her features in silver and shadow, making her look ethereal, otherworldly. Of what, Marcus? His heart hammered against his ribs. This was dangerous territory, crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed. She'd been 16 when he found her, frightened and vulnerable. Yes, she was 19 now, legally an adult by most galactic standards, capable and strong. But he'd been her protector, her teacher, the one stable thing in her universe. Taking advantage of that trust would make him no better than the people who'd hurt her before. But the way she looked at him now, with hope and longing and something deeper that made his breath catch, that wasn't the look of a child. That was a woman who knew her own heart. Of losing you, he finally said. Of doing something that drives you away. You've become... Sienna, you're not just crew. You haven't been for a long time. She closed the distance between them, each step deliberate. Then what am I? Marcus's mouth went dry. I don't know. Something more. Something that scares me, because I never wanted to need anyone again. And do you? She asked, stopping mere inches away, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. Need me? He should lie. He should step back, retreat behind walls of propriety and appropriate distance. Instead, he reached out, his hand trembling slightly as he cupped her cheek. Her skin was warm beneath his palm, soft and alive and real. Yes, he admitted, the word barely more than a breath. God help me, yes. Sienna's eyes closed, and she leaned into his touch like a flower turning toward sunlight. When she opened them again, they shimmered with unshed tears. I thought I was going crazy, feeling things I shouldn't, wanting things I had no right to want. You saved me, Marcus. You gave me everything, safety, purpose, a home. And all I could think about was how much I wanted more. Sienna, let me finish, she interrupted, her voice steady despite the tears now tracking down her cheeks. I know what you're thinking, that I'm young, that you are my guardian, that there's some power imbalance that makes this wrong. But Marcus, I'm not that frightened girl anymore. You helped me become someone strong, someone capable of making my own choices. And I choose this. I choose you. Marcus's resolve crumbled. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her as if she might disappear, and she melted against him with a small sound that was half sob, half laugh. They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the starlight, crossing a threshold neither had fully acknowledged existed. This changes everything, Marcus murmured into her hair. I know, Sienna replied, pulling back just enough to look up at him. Are you brave enough for that? He looked down at her face, illuminated by distant stars, and saw his future reflected in her eyes. It terrified him. It exhilarated him. It felt like the most inevitable thing in the universe. For you? He said, brushing a tear from her cheek with his thumb. I think I might be. Sienna smiled, truly smiled, radiant and full of joy. Then she rose on her toes and kissed him, soft and tentative and perfect. Marcus froze for a heartbeat, then kissed her back, cradling her face in his hands like she was made of something precious and breakable. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sienna laughed a sound of pure, uncomplicated happiness that Marcus realized he'd do anything to hear again. So, she said, her forehead resting against his, what happens now? Marcus thought about the challenges ahead, the questions they'd face, the adjustments they'd need to make. But looking at Sienna, feeling the rightness of her in his arms, all of that seemed manageable. Now, he said, stealing another quick kiss, we figure it out together, like we do everything else. Together, Sienna agreed, her smile brighter than any star beyond the glass. I like the sound of that. And as the wanderer carried them through the endless dark toward whatever future awaited. Marcus held Sienna close and thought that maybe, just maybe, he'd finally found something worth more than all the salvage in the galaxy.